All right, so hello, Michele. Thanks for joining us today on today's episode of the Method Made podcast, where we discuss technology transfer problems, lately focusing on the pharmaceutical industry. So you have a broad range of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. And yeah, in today's episode, I would love to discuss with you the data problem in pharma. So yeah, in previous conversations, it's come up that pharma is a little bit of a conservative industry in some sense in terms of the technology used for data capture and management. I would love to kind of start off talking with you about the current state of data in pharma. How is it captured? How is it stored, moved, and like that kind of thing?
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Nicholas, for the invite. It's great to be here, and I've followed with a great interest your previous episodes. I think that they were great, and hopefully you continue that trend. It's very nice to be here talking about that. I find that now it's quite a hot topic, data and data management, and I find that this is the next big thing that has to happen in pharma, both for efficiency gain, but also to sort of embrace those next technology that is already mature and to bring needed improvement to therapies to the people in need. The current state of data management in pharma is a bit of a scattered landscape. To make differentiation, there's a pharma, there's R&D, and there is production, for instance, CDMO and bioprocessing. Now, in R&D, necessarily because of the complexity of the dealings, this need for smarter tools has surfaced about, I guess, 10 years ago. So I would say that R&D and pharma is leading, and the bioprocessing is sort of lagging a bit behind. That again, because of bioprocessing as relatively easier data to manage, but also because I guess that there is, so for instance, outsourcing CDMOs, for instance, there's a delicate element here of compliance, but also of legal protection. Sometimes clients want to see their data segregated. I don't understand why this is not been ruled yet, but if you take social media, they all pull all your data all together and then they use it for targeted advertisement. So I see that this is an issue at the moment, but for instance, that could prevent, for instance, CDMOs to put all the maps, I don't know, in buckets and say, okay, look, the process is quite similar. Bioprocessing, as said, is lagging behind. The time is now for, I guess, a couple of reasons. One is because we come from a very dry period of funding. So capacity has been built a lot in the past years. Now capacity is no longer a differentiating factor. A key differentiator, I think, is efficiency, time, and speed. Okay, so not necessarily the ability of slotting projects in on demand. This is one driving force. Another driving force is that necessarily at the moment is a buyer's market. If you are not, if you don't have your bottom line under control, if you don't have your offering that somehow differs, it's very hard to procure new business. And this is going to be in the next, I guess, couple of years a key differentiator for survival or merger and acquisition. For instance, smaller players getting consolidated onto bigger ones. To go back to your current status, I also see that so far the digital shift sort of in mindset has not happened yet. This is new concepts, technologies that despite being applied and we use them currently daily, they haven't permeated a more conservative segment like CDMOs or bioprocessing. You can see that there's still a file cabinet mentality where there's the classical media, paper, ELNs, etc., that they are like organized as department rather than by process flow. That the data are not accessible, it's not discoverable, and everything. You go endless search you an SOP. For instance, in investigation, you just look for that clause just to shift responsibility, let's say, whereby just because there's been a proof that it means that it will help you on justifying an outcome or an investigation. We all know that the more stakeholders on the table, the harder it is to reach a conclusion. This is not science driven, but this is sort of opinion driven, and that takes a lot of time. At the same time, there's a metadata and taxonomy gap. Like, even the most modern platforms, document management system, quality management system, they don't have a context. They don't connect to why a batch has failed. It's failed because sterilization parameter was out of range, and it's usually up to the skills of each single investigational team to pick up, oh, that went wrong. But there's not. You don't have data that allow you that contextualization. So every time that you do a search, for instance, that brings you a number of items that it's really hard to make sense of. And also there's a user adoption and reality. Sometimes you got those mandates top down that say, okay, now we have a compliance system. However, the need for people, let's say in the lab or who are doing the actual work, is different. They need to transfer data. They need to have a printed copy because they need it there. They need to have the work done faster, possibly, and on point. Sometimes those systems just provide compliance version control, but they are hard to provide, or they fell short to provide an actual, need or actual answer for the people in need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this goes right to the next thing I would like to talk about, which are sort of the hidden costs of the current systems. So you mentioned there's, a lot of these are sort of optimized for compliance purposes, but the real life needs of the people using them, like process engineers, aren't necessarily the same as just meeting regulatory compliances. So it would be great to discuss a little bit about the hidden costs of the current systems, like inefficiencies. Is time wasted by process engineers due to some of these this current situation?
Well, I would say that the hidden cost is an easy one to point the finger against, and you can really bring all of them: cost, quality, and time, which are the three pillars of pharmaceutical services, if you like. There's one aspect is the data as a data product. So whoever needs them. So for instance, again, the people who's doing on the shop floor, who's doing the actual work, they need, for instance, data transfer from an instrument to a database done efficiently, without copying the physical value, actual values from screen to spreadsheet, whatever you name it. So and the same data, the same process engineer or person in the actual shop floor, they need to see if the trend or if the process behaves. But that's not the same level of information that, for instance, a data scientist or a manager needs. So the one hidden cost is that information is not distributed to whom needs it in the way they need it, okay? Because the raw data is not the same data that an executive needs, okay? But the workflow behind that needs to be transparent and accountable. So you need to know how this raw data goes from source to the user. That needs to be clearly defined. Plus, there's all the quality that I was telling you before. Like, for instance, if you have in CLD input creation, I don't know, some quality attribute that is off, it's very hard to track along the horizontal value chain. So it's very hard if it's not contemporary, if it's not reviewed, to track that there is a problem at the very beginning of the value chain. It's very hard when you track it down. For instance, think about product recalls. This is a disaster. Just because you weren't aware that something went wrong at the time of production, you need to push it out, etc. And sometimes this is because review of data is not contemporary. Review by exception is still an exception, it's not the rule. And because sometimes the relationships between these horizontal steps are siloed. You don't have visibility on the horizontal value chain and across products, okay? Many times, so this is a proper business risk. The efficiency risk, for instance, is or cost, is that how much time do you waste looking for data? You might call your data NC1, and the other one calls their data CN1, and this is already a search issue. Okay, how many times do we reinvent the wheel? How many times do you rewrite the same procedure just because you don't have versioning control, just because you don't have all these just because you need to procedurize everything. For instance, work instructions versus the actual process parameters. Process parameters are variable, work instructions, as long as your equipment is fixed, well, that's about it. And this brings delayed tech transfers, delayed batch releases, and in general cycles of review, they slow down a lot that process of getting from gene to vial in a way that the market needs or the patients need now, not tomorrow. So all these inefficiencies at the end of the day, as I was saying earlier, are not only paid by the people in need. Unfortunately, they need the therapy now, and they also have to bear with our inefficiencies, but also they are bared by the people who actually have to do the work, who feel like that the things never improve.
Yeah. So the people who actually need the medicines and the people on the floor, those are two of the stakeholders that are actually paying the price of some of these inefficiencies today.
But the price is distributed along a bit all the stakeholders. The executives, I was telling you before, they pay the price because they always have to go to somebody to interpret their data. There's not one point, one repository, one source of truth where all the data is stored, and this is a data lake. But then if you apply workflows on that with transparency and accountability, you get to the data product, and you can actually slice that database in a way that makes sense to the audience. So I guess that it needs the new market complexity. If you think about all the cell and gene therapy breakthrough, monoclonal antibodies, which is still a staple, generics or biosimilars, who still are sort of the big bulk of the biotech industry. All of this complexity requires new tools. But if you look behind, all these tools haven't arrived. Clone now can produce multi-grams per liter of product. Bioprocessing somehow, I'm thinking about perfusion, can produce or can lower your cost of goods significantly. But the tools, and this is like all 10 years, 15 years, progresses, but the tools to actually give the people the ability to make decision faster, or I would say on time, they are not there yet, or they haven't not been widely adopted as they have been, for instance, in social media.
Okay, then so this brings me right to the next thing that I would love to discuss, which is sort of the current state of solutions and tools. So you mentioned these tools are 10, 15 years old. Maybe we could discuss a little bit what are the current tools that are used for data management in pharma today? Is it like Microsoft SharePoint, larger quality management systems? How do people actually, how does this data move around, and how do people actually interpret it today?
Well, so let's have a disclaimer. I don't like Microsoft, but I like it because, without going to usual suspects to Microsoft, let's say, in terms of IT, I don't like Microsoft because it's kept people with the same user interface for 20 plus years. I like them because they're really, everywhere. So because of their ease to access, I'm talking about spreadsheets, I'm talking about emails, PDFs, it makes people comfortable. It makes people not needing to update themselves and actually think about the work to be done. But with new technologies, especially with the faster and faster world now, I think that this is no longer an excuse. We need to move on. To your point, saying what do people use now, I would say that again, the landscape is very fragmented. So there are, in the digital journey, in the digital ladder, where you start from spreadsheets, email, PDFs, and then you go to ELNs, LIMS, etc. Then you progress. towards more, a structured database where you can actually have relationships and the business logic to then go to machine learning and AI. I would say that 80% of the players fit within the first and the second step. So siloed data systems, moved manually, no automated workflow, no QC or quality control on the input of the data, no slicing of matrix. Sometimes for some people who have started a bit earlier to digitalize, they have adopted DLNs, for instance, to have instruments interfaced to a data lake. They have LIMS to have, I don't know, one repository where you can track your samples preparation and your actually analytics requirements. But, these are all disconnected systems that still stand alone, and they do not bridge that information, horizontal and vertical information organization that is needed to sort of improve, to give a tangible improvement on cost, quality, and speed, and complexity of modalities.
Okay, so this sort of siloed approach of the current systems, would you say this is one of the sources of the problem of the unified source of truth you kind of discussed earlier, where there are sort of too many sources of truth at the same time?
Well, there is scattered information, and again, we need to cater for yes, the patient, so speed, quality, and time, but also and cost. Sorry, but also we need to cater for the people who actually do the job, and we actually need to provide them with tools and the justification for. So yes, again, a USB stick is or a printed page is a very effective solution to having the work done. Okay, but it doesn't cut. So it's obviously outgrown. Spreadsheets have obviously outgrown their purpose. QMS of one scope, which is only addressing part of the problem, which is the compliance and the versioning.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So one thing I'd be kind of curious about, what is your vision? Like, what would you see as a solid digital backbone? What would you see as priorities for sort of the next steps?
Well, I see it in a couple of ways. One is clearly try to do not cut corners. So, like, for instance, if you have chaos, adding automation layer, or for instance, a manufacturing execution system where you don't have a data management policy, it actually adds more chaos and multiplies the issue. So the very first thing is to make sure that there's like a diagnostic done. So this organizations that are digitally fluent, they know what they want, they know how to improve their workflows, and their organizations will need to be taken by the hand and say, okay, look, this is what's possible. So education and issue fixing. The very fundamental layer, I think, for this digital journey, an enabler rather than a solution, but it's like an enabler, is a structured database. So it's a database that has a quality control in the input, so has rules to input, as rule for storage, so then you can actually slice it and find information. Beside all the things, compliance, data integrity, disaster recovery, these are all accessory, but you need to have a validation in the input, and you need to have a business logic to store that information. So for instance, what is your theoretical process? How do you support it with data? How do you make sure that each step of the process that you have defined in theory is actually fulfilled by your experimental data? And that also has to have access. Everybody who needs information, the information is there. What needs to happen, though, is that organizations are able to do change management and risk management, because, for instance, development enables you manufacturing enables your revenue, sure. But if you want to do the risk manufacturing, you actually have to have your data in one place where describe your process. So then when you have manufacturing issue, you go back to your development data and say, okay, well, my process operates in this, but within this range, actually we can accept the deviation because it does not impact on the QTTP. So again, doing the right thing from the foundation, which means that have a policy, have a business logic for your data, have your data structured, queryable. So you have to have a way to slice the matrix in a way that makes sense to your audience. And you have to have, of course, quality checks and accountability. You know where you are in your workflow. You know what the quality of your data is every time. Therefore, you can use it.
Okay.
And then with all of that, then you can do, of course, it enables business discipline and risk management. So businesses have to do the right thing because they have to follow accountable and transparent workflow. But then you can build on that. You can do hybrid models. If you know what DOE, hybrid models, online PAT. So for instance, online feedback, you have your analytical instrumentation connected to your batch. You know that as long as your batch is within this range, it's fine. As soon as it deviates from the range, then your analytical equipment picks it up and your effectors in your hardware then corrects it. At the same time, you have to have, then you can base that for all your machine learning and AI. The problem with machine learning and AI is not buying the model, is actually having the data to train it. If you don't have quality in, you know what you get out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I'd love to kind of go back to, you mentioned the importance of having validation, quality control on the data going in. It'd be great to kind of hear, for someone who might be new to this, a newer company, what does that look like? So for example, if they're starting out and starting to get their systems in place, what might they want to consider as they're doing that to ensure they have that sort of structured data from the get-go?
Well, one aspect is clearly the data integrity. So you want as much raw data as possible input on your database. So that means that your machine and your database talk directly. There's no human intervention. The structured database and the quality in means that you start defining acceptability for your data. For instance, the formatting, that how the raw data comes directly from the machine, so you know what to expect, and all of that a traditional spreadsheet does not provide. So again, the best thing would be that you have direct interface. Okay, the data is stored and is organized in a way that makes sense to the database. So when you buy a database, you also buy a business logic. Okay, the way that you get the freedom of having your data accessible and available to everybody at one source of truth by adhering to a business logic, to a way of storing it. But then you have, your quality control. Like for instance, if your data goes, say for instance, assays, analytical assays, if your data is below the detection limit of the assay, where there's not much to discuss, you reject that data, or you mark them as you flag them and say, okay, this data is not reliable. That doesn't need to be a manual check. That needs to be an automatic check. Again, it's a review by exception. You know what your standard curve tells you, and automatically where you will accept this data. All calibration data. All validation data. If it's like within not the validated range, where you have to have a discussion whether or not the data is meaningful to you, or you can accept it for, to support your claims in process scalability, you name it. But you need to have the filter in the inside based on the business logic.
Okay, that's good to understand. And so these quality control rules you're discussing, these are all just statistical rules. So there's not much in terms of subjective interpretation. I mean, of course there always is, but it sounds like this could definitely be automated because they're rules, like limit of detection and that type of thing. Would you kind of agree, or?
Yes, and then you can set your own rules. Again, as long as you are accountable and transparent on that, everybody knows why this particular one point has been rejected and is accessible to the user of the database. Of course, the database has to be then widely adopted. Sort of the foundation of the system, because all the data fills in, goes onto that one single place, analytical, upstream, downstream, manufacturing execution systems, everything fits in there. But the rules, whether you set them or they are scientific rules because come from limited detections, it's actually something that is agreed upon, and it's shared, it's accountable. You obey to those rules. Why? Because they make sense because of XYZ.
Okay, so those can fit right into, or they should fit directly into the sort of quality management system.
Correct, and that's then a business logic of QMS, but it's like the master plan for the master quality plan or whatever you want to call it. That's business specific. Of course, businesses need to be smart enough to use these to really provide an added value. Okay, like remove the junk, remove the source of variability, remove the source of errors. But this is all plan. This is all part of the bigger plan. How do you, as a business, add value to your clients or to your operations?
Okay, so that's great to know. One last thing I would be interested to discuss is considering the sort of the need for these unified data systems. Are we at a place where, so there's certain transfers of data that happen, for instance, between CROs, CDMOs, CMOs. Is there a lot of coordination ahead of time between these different groups when they need to transfer data? Or is it something that sort of happens at the time being? For instance, when a manufacturing run is needed, data will be transferred in whatever format the sort of sender is already using. Like, do people currently coordinate that much ahead of time? Or is it something that is generally done kind of as needed?
I would say at the moment is more ad hoc, but of course there's more and more. So there's usually data packages that are prepared and sent based on days run needs, okay, or CROs transferring that, whatever, you name it. There's a couple of solutions here. Of course, the more you get onto structured databases, the more sort of that machine language is universally adopted. And you see now FDA also has this speed review for digital ready organizations. So one aspect is for sure that the more those digital solutions come in, the more sort of machine language we sort of get the machines to talk to each other. The other one is that you can build APIs, you can build the parsers, you can build computer programs that actually ingest that data and structure it for you. Okay, this is a big topic, I have to say, that you see people who want, to make sense or to start using a year in the past worth of data. It will take them 6 months, 12 months, depends on the effort required, but then you can start having a critical mass of data to which then you can use to do predictive modeling. You can use to do built-in history for your most common process or molecules, you name it. How you want to use it, it's just downstream of the centerpiece of data that is structured. But so the two approaches is this, that the more, and think about R&D. R&D, I was telling you before, has been doing this for 10 years. Think about R&D going to CDMO and saying, oh, look, here's my molecule to produce. Here's my data package to support this production. And the CDMO goes, oh, great, please print it. or give me a spreadsheet to interpret it. That takes time. That exercise takes time. At the same time, the more evolved those organizations get, the more you can retroactively fix it. You can say, okay, well, I am able to build an interface that makes sense of your emails, spreadsheets, unstructured, whatever, PDFs or raw data files worth of hundreds of thousands of runs. Of course, then the interpretation, it's what will take lots of time. Then you actually have still to go, I'm not saying manually, but you have to build a case why, what is your in and out, what you get or what you don't. But I would say the trend is looking positive, more digital ready organizations and more and more like organizations who are trying to fill that technology gap. To your answer, yes, it's done ad hoc, but it's more and more holistically addressed. Whether or not organizations want to share all that IP, then it's a different type of conversation. Of course, you're always able to slice your databases in the way you want, okay? Both for audience or processing, but also for depth of or access privileges, okay? So that's definitely not an issue. It's something possible, as well as it's something possible towards, this is a more future-oriented, to be able to have that I/O input-output towards your software that controls the hardware. So you basically put your data, you know your parameters where they should be, your process should run within these parameters. Now you actually have the ability that your model tells your software controlling your hardware to say, okay, look, please do this. I always use please to the AI just in case in the future they take over, I'm the one who was asking you things, please. But you're actually able to have that IO, that AP, that interfacing between your logic and your execution system, and vice versa. So I was telling you before that there's more and more now process analytical technologies that are live, that are contemporary. At the same time, you have that business logic that tells you, okay, look, we need to go this direction with this process. Say, for instance, scale up or scale down a force. You're able to transfer those parameters that scale up and scale down directly to your hardware, more and more. So your tech transfer or your SOPs or your investigation become really an interface between logic, statistics, and hardware.
Okay, and so it sounds like there might be sort of an opportunity, like what you're describing almost sounds like an API between the data systems of the sending and receiving plants. Like you mentioned, a CDMO might ask for a printed version or an Excel sheet. And it sounds like there is really a need for a way to transfer data between organizations as well in a standardized format, such that the receivers understand it in their own language, in their systems, and they can kind of operate with it.
Yes, and the hardware can actually process it.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is science fiction. I think this is the near future, or this is one way where that value can be delivered faster and cheaper to all the stakeholders.
Wow. Well, yeah, thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Method Made podcast. It's been super informative. So yeah, I look forward to it.
Thank you, Nicholas, for this opportunity, and thanks everybody for listening. Looking forward to the next episodes.
Great.